Okay, so I have to start with, I guess, a clarification, because if you go out and study tsetse flies, it doesn't mean that you think tsetse flies are the best form of life. It just means that they're there, and it's worth studying. And when I was at the Library of Congress, I wanted to study the NASA definition of life. I'm not going to talk about the NASA definition of life because it's the best definition of life. I don't think it's the best definition of life. It is, however, a definition of life which has been very successful in the community, and therefore it's worth understanding how it operates and how it came to be. So, I just want to say ahead of time, I actually got here because I really dislike people who want everyone else to have their exact same definition of life. That's not what I'm doing. I wrote a paper on the history of the definition of life. The journal Astrobiology said, great, but tell us what we should do with it. And so the paper became longer because the editors required me to say something about where I wanted it to go. So, with that caveat in mind, we're going to talk about the quote-unquote NASA definition of life. So what is the NASA definition? Many of you will be familiar. Life is a self-sustained chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Insofar as the literature is concerned, this appears with 98 words by Gerald Joyce in the introduction to a book in 1994. He does not defend this idea. He just sort of throws it out there. Basically, in the literature, it is only argued against. It is not operationalizable. It is not consensus. It's not analytically clear. There's lots of problems with the NASA definition of life. And I will say, like I ranted about this, some of you will remember, for a long period of time, and I told my students, you can't call it the NASA definition of life, and just put scare quotes around it. And eventually they came back to me and they said, yeah, but if I go to NASA's website lists this as the NASA definition of life. And so I had to give in. This is now the NASA definition of life, whether I like it or not. It does have many interesting things, and I've come to appreciate some of them. So, how did it come about? The NASA definition came about as sort of the consensus of the NASA exobiology discipline working group, which John Rummel called together when he was the program manager for NASA exobiology. It met for approximately 6 or 7 years, from 87 through 93. I know these people. I went and asked them. I was only able to identify 5 members of the 12-member committee. I should poke them a little bit more, but you know, like, this is a committee that didn't produce any official documentation whatsoever. We should be able to go back and look at maybe Gerald and John's notes. So if someone is aspiring, you can find out who these folks were. So I was able to identify Richard Young, Andrew Knoll, Jerry Joyce, and Ben Clark. And they basically said, if we're going to say that NASA exobiology is looking for life elsewhere, we need to know what it is we think that we're looking for. You can agree or disagree with that, but that was sort of the goal of this group, and that's what Jerry ended up putting in the foreword to Dave Deemer's book. Now, if we look historically, there is some background. Fascinatingly, Steve Benner, if you're familiar with Benner 2010, says that the group got it from Carl Sagan. However, if you talk to members of the group, they did not talk to Carl Sagan about this. So, Carl, in Encyclopedia Britannica, has his genetic criterion for life, a system capable of evolution by natural selection. So clearly there's something similar going on there in thinking. Carl has 5 different definitions of life in that article, which is really interesting, particularly historically. When I was at the Library of Congress, I went back and looked at previous Encyclopedia Britannica entries and asked, what were people saying before Carl about this question? So the previous entry, wonderfully written by J.D. Bernal, simply says the criterion of continual interchange of material may be termed the metabolic criterion, that of origin from a pre-existing object of the same class, the reproductive criterion. So you've got some similar aspects, but it's basically bouncing back to this idea of replication or reproduction plus metabolism without further elucidation. And this is very similar to what Evelyn Hutchinson is producing in the previous article on the Encyclopedia Britannica. And if you want to go back earlier, here's my book. This idea of metabolism plus replication goes all the way back to Aristotle. It's fairly common, and it doesn't change a whole lot over 3 millennia of descriptions of this phenomenon. The interesting thing I would say that I really came to in looking at this is that Sagan and others in the late 20th century have identified some particular refinements that have been more specific than replication and metabolism. They have tried to make those mechanical, and they've successfully operationalized them for Earth life in terms of particular abstract and concrete systems. So coming back to the NASA definition, life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Talking with Joyce, self-sustained referred to the heritable information necessary to undergo Darwinian evolution. He doesn't actually have metabolism in mind, except insofar as it is that metabolism which is necessary for Darwinian evolution. So this is not really a paired definition the way the earlier definitions had been. It is a replication definition that understands metabolism as a necessary part of that picture. So I think there's this interesting question of levels of abstraction. So we can talk about metabolism at the most abstract level as self-regulation, and we can talk about sort of concrete mechanisms of metabolism, but we don't have much of, well, there are many theories of the middle ground. There's no consensus on the middle ground. So if you want, you can dive into Mascherano and Morella. There's many other versions, but nothing has really caught on as what this middle ground should be between the specifics of Earth life and this general principle of self-regulation. On the other hand, if you look at reproduction, self-replication on the abstract level, and the particulars of DNA and RNA for Terrian life on the sort of mechanical level, there are intermediate levels of abstraction, specifically the mechanics of natural selection and population genetics. And so there is an interesting middle ground, and I think that Sagan and the NASA definition have made a significant advance with regard to the definition of life in terms of identifying this middle ground, which many people, including myself, do think is more universal, do think is something that we might observe in other forms of life. They wanted a recommendation, so here's my recommendation for what NASA should do. I would like to say NASA will recognize life in a self-sustained chemical system, demonstrating evolution by natural selection. I'm just going to highlight 3 features of that. It is operational and context specific. I'm not attempting to make any claim about the natural kind of life. I'm just saying, people at NASA, they're giving out money for people that they think will aid this recognition. Demonstrating, I hate capable, that's a long argument. There are people on the other side who are very respectable. Nonetheless, I would prefer to shift from, we think that this thing can do something in the future, to this thing has demonstrated something that occurred in the past that we find interesting. And natural selection, Carlos said a little bit about this question. Darwinian evolution, neither for proponents of it means the evolution proposed by Darwin, nor for most of us does it mean the specific neo-Darwinian synthesis. So I find Darwinian evolution to be really misleading. I think it covers up a lot of the things that are interesting that we argue about. So I want to say, we're looking for evolution by natural selection. There may well be other forms of evolution that occur. I think that's great. But I think the evolution by natural selection is the version of evolution which we have operationalized in a powerful way, such that if we found it elsewhere, we would be confident that we had found something of significant interest. If you want to know more, this one has actually made it out into print. It's very rare I get to talk and actually know what I'm talking about. But this is the case, so if you want to follow up, big thank you to Kelly and the organizers. Dave Wilkinson, an equipping Christian leadership in an age of science. This is what I do right now. I connect senior church leaders to science and scientists around the world. And of course to NASA and the Library of Congress for the time for the Bloomberg Chair to do some of this research.